Tonight, I've got 3 true highway horror stories that'll make you think twice about your next late-night drive. So buckle up, and let's hit the road. I remember that night like it was yesterday. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. I had the radio on low, some late-night talk show discussing conspiracy theories. It was almost comforting, a distraction from the monotony of the empty highway stretching out before me. About an hour into my drive, I spotted a figure on the side of the road. When I first saw her, I thought my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. She seemed to shimmer in the darkness, her pale skin and light-colored dress standing out starkly against the inky black of the night. As I got closer, I could see her more clearly. It was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, thumb out, trying to catch a ride. I knew I shouldn't stop. Every instinct told me to keep driving. But there was something in her eyes as I approached, a desperation, a pleading look that I couldn't ignore. Before I knew it, I was pulling over onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under my tires. She got in without a word, just a small nod of thanks. Up close, she was even more unsettling. Her skin was so pale it was almost translucent, and her eyes, they seemed to reflect the light like a cat's. The silence in the car was uncomfortable, so I tried to make conversation. "Where are you headed?" I asked. She mumbled something about a small town about 30 miles ahead. I nodded and focused on the road. The next few minutes were tense. I could feel her eyes on me, but every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, she was staring out the window. The temperature in the car seemed to drop, and I found myself shivering despite the heater being on full blast. Suddenly, she spoke up. "Can you pull over here?" she asked, pointing to an old, overgrown road. Her voice was hollow, echoing as if from a great distance. I hesitated but complied. As I slowed down, I turned to ask her if she was sure this was the right place. The seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding. I looked around frantically. She was gone, vanished into thin air. Shaken, I drove to the nearest gas station and told the attendant what happened. He just nodded, knowingly, and said, "Ah, you've met Sarah. She died on that stretch of road 40 years ago. Folks see her sometimes, still trying to get home." Since that day, I have never stopped to pick up any hitchhiker. Mike told me this story over a beer, his hands shaking slightly as he recounted the events of that night. He'd been driving for hours, the Nevada desert a featureless expanse of darkness on either side of the highway. When he saw the lights of the truck stop, it was like an oasis in the middle of nowhere. The place was run down, a relic from a bygone era. Flickering neon signs advertised hot coffee and clean restroom. The only other vehicle in sight was an old RV, its once white exterior, now a dingy gray, parked at the far end of the lot. Mike said he felt uneasy from the moment he stepped out of his car. The air was too still, the silence too complete. Even the usual nighttime sounds, crickets, distant traffic, were absent. But he needed gas and caffeine, so he pushed his concerns aside and went about his business. The inside of the truck stop was no better than the outside. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow over the dusty shelves and grimy floor. The coffee machine gurgled ominously as Mike filled a styrofoam cup with what he hoped was drinkable coffee. As he paid, couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That's when he noticed the man in the RV, staring at him through the window. Their eyes met, and Mike felt a chill run down his spine. Back at his car, Mike's worst fears were realized when the engine refused to turn over. Popped the hood, hoping it was something simple he could fix. That's when he heard footsteps approaching. The man from the RV introduced himself as Frank, offering to help with a friendly smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Mike noticed how Frank kept positioning himself between Mike and the store, cutting off his escape route. When Mike spotted the knife, his heart nearly stopped. It wasn't brandished as a threat, just casually visible, tucked into Frank's belt. But the implication was clear. Suddenly the police car arrived. This was like a miracle. Mike had never been so glad to see flashing lights in his life. The officer's suspicion, Frank's attempted flight, and the revelation of his true identity all happened in a blur. Later, Mike learned that Frank had been terrorizing travelers up and down the highway for months. The truck stop owner had gone missing weeks ago, and Frank had simply taken over, using the isolated location as his hunting ground. To this day, Mike can't bring himself to drive long distances at night. He says whenever he sees a lonely gas station or a solitary RV, his heart starts racing, and he's right back in that moment, staring into the eyes of a man who saw him not as a person, but as prey. Dave's story spread through the trucking community like wildfire. Some dismissed it as a tall tale, product of too many hours on the road and too little sleep. But those who know Dave, who've driven with him, swear he's not the type to make up stories. He described the fog that night as being unlike anything he'd ever seen. It rolled in thick and fast, reducing visibility to mere feet in front of his truck. The mountain road was already dangerous, but in the fog, it was terrifying. Every turn was a gamble. Dave had been driving this route for years, but in the fog, everything looked different. Familiar landmarks were swallowed up, leaving him feeling lost and uneasy. The CB radio was silent, not even static coming through. It was as if the whole world had disappeared, leaving Dave alone in a sea of white. When the other truck appeared behind him, Dave initially felt relief. Having another vehicle nearby made him feel less alone in the impenetrable mist. That relief quickly turned to confusion, then fear, as the truck behind him began to act strangely. Dave swears that in the moment he saw the empty cab, time seemed to stand still. He remembers every detail: the shiny chrome, pitch-black windshield, the way the fog seemed to move around the truck, as if it wasn't fully part of this world. The sound of metal on metal as the phantom truck made contact with his rig will haunt Dave for the rest of his life. He described it as not just a sound, but a feeling, a bone-deep vibration that seemed to resonate with something terrifying. As Dave pulled into the rest area, caught one last glimpse of the phantom truck. For a split second, he swears he saw a figure in the cab, skeletal hand gripping the wheel, empty eye sockets staring straight ahead. Then it was gone, swallowed up by the fog. In the days following the incident, Dave researched the stretch of road where it happened. He uncovered not just the story of the trucker who died there 20 years ago, but a long history of accidents and strange occurrences. Local legend speaks of a curse on the mountain, of restless spirits who lure unsuspecting drivers to their doom. Dave doesn't know what to believe anymore. He's left the long-haul life behind now, sticking to short, daytime routes.